I was only trying to protect my daughter.
How long have you been going through my house?
Don't you dare trust this man. Your daddy used to make sweet promises too, right before he walked out and left us with nothing but debt and an empty side of the bed. That is not what is happening here, Mama. That is what happened to you.
Not quite shame, not quite anger. The exact look of a woman who has lived so long inside a story she built herself that she forgot it was never the only true one. Jacob did not move, broad hands still flat on the table, steady, the way roots hold when everything above the ground is shaking. She hadn't come to protect anyone. She had come to collect, for years, in silence, under his own roof. His name was Jacob, 34 years old, and for most of his life he had believed one simple thing: a man's word is worth more than his temper. Quiet work outlasts loud talk, every single time. That belief got tested on a Tuesday afternoon in Indianola, Mississippi. The same afternoon, his mother-in-law stood in the living room of his own house and called 911 to report him as a trespasser. She had known his face for 4 years, had eaten at his table more Sunday dinners than she could count, and she still told the dispatcher there was a strange man breaking into her daughter's home. Here is the part she did not know, the part that would unravel everything she thought she understood about him, about that house, about who really held the power in that family. The security camera mounted on the light pole out front had been recording the whole time. Picture it for a moment. A man pulling into his own driveway, lunchbox on the seat beside him, met by flashing blue lights, because his wife's mother decided he did not belong there. Anyone who has ever been underestimated by someone who was supposed to love them already knows exactly how that lands. This is a story about a woman who spent years rewriting the truth to make herself the victim, and a man who finally let the facts speak for themselves. It was late October. The soybean fields outside Indianola were turning that dusty gold color they get right before harvest. The air smelled like cut hay and diesel. Jacob's old blue Ford pickup rattled along the red dirt road past the Delta Pride catfish ponds. Windows down, radio turned low to a gospel station out of Greenwood. He had been up since 5 that morning, knee-deep in the east field, checking moisture levels before the combine crew came through. His gloves sat on the passenger seat, stiff with dried mud. His lunchbox, the same dented green one his daddy used to carry, rattled against the door panel every time the truck hit a rut. His phone buzzed against his thigh, a text from Nala. "Zion and I are at the pediatric clinic in Greenwood. We'll be home a little late, baby." Jacob smiled at the road ahead. 8 months old. And that little girl already had more doctor's appointments than he had in his whole childhood. He did not mind. Some men complained about pediatric visits and formula bills. Jacob just felt lucky. 4 years married to a woman he still chose every morning. And a daughter who grabbed his finger like she was never going to let go. The house came into view past the bend. A 2-bedroom wood-frame place with a tin roof that pinged when it rained. Sitting on 11 acres he had bought with his own money back in 2020. 2 full years before he and Nala ever stood in front of a preacher. He had built the porch swing himself out of cedar planks, had planted the pecan tree out front the same week he closed on the land. It was his. Every board, every acre, every nail. He pulled into the gravel drive earlier than usual. The field crew had finished ahead of schedule, gave him back 2 hours he was not expecting. He cut the engine and reached for his lunchbox. That is when he heard it. His mother-in-law's voice, sharp and carrying, coming from inside the open front door. "There's a man trying to break into my daughter's house. I'm watching the house for my daughter, and he just drove into the yard." Jacob froze, one boot still on the porch step. He knew that voice, had been hearing it at Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings for 4 years. Evelyn Brooks, Mama Evelyn, as everyone called her. She had a way of making her voice do exactly what she wanted it to do, and right now, it was performing panic. The practiced kind. The kind that sounds convincing to a 911 dispatcher and sounds entirely different to a man who has watched this same woman negotiate a church rummage sale down to the dollar. There was no reason for her to be there. Nala and Zion were at the clinic in Greenwood. There was no child to watch, no errand to run on anyone's behalf. Mama Evelyn had a spare key, the same key Nala had pressed into her hand 2 years earlier for genuine emergencies, and she had used it to let herself in on a Tuesday afternoon, when she believed the house would be empty. Instead of walking through the front door, Jacob pulled out his phone and opened the security app, the one connected to the camera he had installed on the light pole 7 months earlier, after a string of cattle thefts had moved through 3 counties. The feed loaded in real time. What he saw stopped him cold. Mama Evelyn was standing at the edge of the hallway, phone to her ear, but not in the middle of the living room. She was positioned beside the closet where Jacob kept the farm's property files, the insurance documents, the original deed. The closet door was open slightly behind her. A manila folder sat on the top shelf at an angle. Not the angle Jacob had left it in that morning. She had not come to watch anything. She had come to look for something. And Jacob had come home 2 hours early. The 911 call was not a plan. It was a reflex. The reflex of a woman caught in the middle of something she could not explain, throwing up a wall of noise before the questions could begin. Jacob took a slow breath, the kind his own father used to take before saying something that could not be taken back. Then he pushed open the door. Mama Evelyn turned. For one unguarded second, her eyes went wide. Not with fear, with something that looked a great deal more like caught. Then, just as fast, her face rearranged itself back into alarm. "He's inside the house now," she shouted into the phone. "Please, save my daughter." Jacob did not raise his voice, did not reach for the phone. He simply stood in the doorway of the house he had paid for, in full, with no name on the deed but his own, and waited. He had no idea, standing there, that this was not the first time she had opened that closet. It was simply the first time he had come home early enough to see it. Stay with this one, because what the police found in that deed folder was only the first layer of what Mama Evelyn never expected him to have proof of. The deputy who responded was a heavyset man named Officer Reyes, the kind of officer who had driven out to enough rural disputes in Sunflower County to know that loud did not always mean true. He stepped into the living room, took one look at Jacob's calm posture, at Mama Evelyn's rigid shoulders, and asked the only question that mattered. "Sir, do you have anything showing you live here?" Jacob walked to the hallway closet without a word. He noticed immediately. The manila folder on the top shelf had been shifted, pulled forward, and replaced at a slight angle. The way something looks when someone has leafed through it in a hurry. He pulled the folder out and handed it to the officer, without comment. Inside was the property deed, county stamped, dated 2020. Jacob Mosley, sole owner. Officer Reyes flipped through it slowly, glanced at Mama Evelyn, then back down. Paperwork's valid. He purchased the property before the marriage. He said it plainly, the way a man states a fact he is already tired of having to repeat. Mama Evelyn's chin lifted. He could have forged it. My daughter told me this house belongs to her. Reyes closed the folder, handed it back to Jacob, then turned to face Mama Evelyn directly. His voice dropped, quiet, careful. "Ma'am, filing a false police report is a misdemeanor in this state. I'd encourage you to think carefully before this goes any further." The mask did not slip exactly, but it thinned. Before leaving, Reyes pulled Jacob aside at the front door. Voice low. "You've got grounds for a formal complaint if you want to go that route. The call log. The camera footage. It's all there." Jacob looked out at the pecan tree in the yard, still and gold in the afternoon light. "I appreciate that," he said quietly, "but some battles aren't worth winning twice." Reyes nodded, like a man who understood that, and left. The squad car pulled out of the gravel drive, taillights disappearing past the bend. Mama Evelyn stood in the doorway a moment longer, smoothing the front of her blouse, like she was straightening more than fabric. "This isn't over," she said. Then she was gone, her sedan kicking up red dust all the way down the road toward town. Jacob sat down on the porch steps. The cedar swing beside him rocked gently in the wind, like the house itself was exhaling. Here is something worth sitting with. Jacob never raised his voice, not at the deputy, not at his mother-in-law, not even when she accused him of forgery in his own living room. And when given the opportunity to press formal charges, he declined. Not because he lacked the standing, but because he already understood, in a way most men take years to learn, that the loudest response is rarely the most powerful one. He chose to let the facts stand on their own, and the facts were not finished speaking yet. Nala got home a little after 7, Zion asleep in her car seat, diaper bag slung over one shoulder, takeout containers from the Greenwood Sonic balanced in the crook of her other arm. She took one look at Jacob's face on the porch and set everything down. Before he said a single word, "What happened?" Jacob told her. All of it. The 911 call, the camera footage, the shifted folder in the closet. Nala went still on the top step. Then, slowly, she lowered herself down beside him. "I let Mama think this house was mine," she said, her voice cracking somewhere in the middle of the sentence. "Because she was always saying I had married a man who couldn't provide for his wife and child. I never meant for it to go this far, Jacob. I swear I didn't." Jacob looked at his wife in silence. 4 years of marriage, and this was the first time he had seen her cry from somewhere underneath the surface. Not the easy tears of a sad movie on a Sunday afternoon, but the kind that come from a much older wound finally cracking open. They went inside. Later that evening, after Zion was settled and the house had gone quiet, Nala sat across from Jacob at the kitchen table and pulled out her phone. "There's something I want you to hear," she said. Her voice was steady but deliberate. The voice of someone who had made a decision and was not going to let herself walk it back. "I kept telling myself it didn't matter, that she was just being a protective mother. But after what she did today, I can't keep pretending I didn't already know what this was." She found the file, a voicemail she had saved more than 2 years ago, not long after their wedding, and pressed play. Mama Evelyn's voice came through the speaker, worn and certain. "Listen to me, baby. Men make promises they don't always keep. I watched your daddy smile in my face for 9 years before he walked out and left me with nothing but bills and an empty side of the bed. Whatever Jacob is telling you, you keep your own eyes open. Don't you ever let yourself depend on a man for everything." Nala set the phone down. "She said some version of that to me every few months. I told myself it was just worry. But looking at what she was doing in that closet today, it was never worry. It was preparation." Jacob sat quietly for a long moment. It was not the words themselves that unsettled him. A worried mother's caution, on its own, was nothing new. It was the certainty underneath them. The sense that the verdict about him had been delivered, long before he had ever done a single thing to deserve it. What Nala had been living inside for years has a name that family therapists recognize immediately: ambient undermining. The slow, patient erosion of a partner's credibility through repetition rather than through a single dramatic accusation. No one warning is enough to confront. No one phone call is enough to act on. But repeated often enough, across enough years, a daughter quietly learns to see her husband through her mother's fear instead of her own experience. That shift rarely announces itself. It simply rearranges what feels true. Until the morning a woman replays her husband's voicemails, just to remind herself she still trusts him. 2 days later, Jacob's phone rang. It was a woman from First Security Bank in Indianola, calling to let him know his wife had phoned that morning to ask about the process for adding a name to a property deed. Jacob kept his voice even. "Did she complete the request?" "No, sir. She stopped partway through, said she needed more time to think. But I do want to flag that there was a separate inquiry 4 days ago." From a different number. The caller identified herself as a relative of the account holder and asked the same question. "We declined. No authorization on file. No signature from the owner." Jacob already knew the number before he asked. He thanked the woman and ended the call. He asked Nala to come into the kitchen. "Your mother called the bank 4 days ago," he said, "before you did." Nala's hands tightened around the edge of the table. "I didn't know that. I called this morning because she had been pushing me for weeks, saying I had to protect myself, protect Zion. But I stopped halfway through. I couldn't finish it. Something in me kept saying it was wrong." "Why didn't you tell me she was pushing you?" Nala looked down at the table. "Because I kept hoping she would stop on her own, and because I was ashamed that I had almost gone through with it." Jacob believed every word. That was the aching part of it. He genuinely believed her. But belief did not erase the fact that 4 days earlier, his mother-in-law had quietly tried to maneuver ownership of land he had worked himself raw to pay for, using his wife's name as the door. He looked out the window at the soybean fields, endless and gold in the late afternoon light, and felt something settle inside him into a decision that had been forming for a long time. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a worried mother crossing a line by accident. This was a pattern. Patient, deliberate, and old enough that it had roots he had not yet seen. And patterns, in his experience, did not stop until someone was willing to name them in the light. Quick question before you go on. If your own mother quietly tried to put your house in her name without ever telling you, would you call that protection or betrayal? Drop a yes or no below. Because what Jacob's brother found in a family group chat is about to prove this went much deeper than a phone call to a bank. After the bank call, Jacob did one thing quietly, without telling Nala. He sent his younger brother Marcus a text. "Keep your eyes open. If Mama Evelyn says anything in any group chat about me, about this house, about Nala, screenshot it and send it to me." Marcus had been added to a family chat months earlier through a cousin's wedding planning thread. He farmed 40 acres on the other side of the county, paid attention to more than he ever let on, and had been watching Mama Evelyn with the quiet wariness of a man who had seen what she did to his brother's confidence over 4 years of Sunday dinners. He texted back 2 words, "Already watching." Jacob told Nala he wanted her to call her mother, ask her to come by, not for a confrontation, he told her, a conversation. Nala did not fully believe him. And honestly, neither did he. But Mama Evelyn arrived that Saturday anyway, dressed like she was heading to a deacon's meeting rather than a difficult talk with her son-in-law. Dark blouse, faux pearl necklace, a small amber prescription bottle visible at the top of her purse that Jacob recognized from previous visits as her blood pressure medication. Her chin was already tilted at the particular angle it assumed when she expected to win. She sat in the armchair by the window without being asked, smoothing her skirt over her knees. "I assume this is about the house again," she said. Before anyone else had spoken a word, Jacob's phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "You need to see these. Sending now." Screenshots loaded one after another, messages from a family group chat sent in Mama Evelyn's name. Dated 6 weeks earlier. "My daughter is about to get herself some new land if she leaves that farm boy. I'm already arranging for her to meet a man with better money. The land will be put in my baby's name." And further down in the same thread. "I already looked through that man's property papers the last time my daughter asked me to hold on to the house key." Jacob set the phone face up on the table and slid it toward his mother-in-law, without a word. Mama Evelyn looked down at the screen. The stillness that moved through her body was not the stillness of innocence. It was the stillness of a person recalculating. "How long have you been going through my house?" Jacob asked. Her jaw tightened. Her voice came out steady, almost rehearsed. "I was only trying to protect my daughter." Nala, standing near the kitchen doorway with Zion balanced on her hip, had gone very still. "Mama," she said, barely above a whisper, "what did you do?" Mama Evelyn turned to her daughter. "Don't you dare trust this man. Your daddy used to make sweet promises too. And then he walked out on both of us." The room went quiet, except for the hum of the window unit and the small, soft sounds Zion made against her mother's shoulder. It is worth pausing here on what just happened, because it matters more than it might seem on the surface. The moment Mama Evelyn invoked Nala's father, she did something psychologists who study family systems call triangulation, pulling a third party, in this case the ghost of a man who left 19 years ago, into a present conflict. So the real issue never has to be faced directly. Jacob was never truly the target of her fear. He was simply standing in the place where an old wound still pointed. That confusion between a present husband and a past betrayal is exactly what had been steering this family for years without anyone putting a name to it. Nala looked at her mother for a long, unsteady moment. Then she looked back at the phone on the table. "You said you were arranging for me to meet someone else," she said, her voice shaking but even. "She mentioned a name in that chat, Jacob. A man she wanted me to meet. She brought it up twice last spring, and I told her both times that I was not interested. I didn't think she was serious. I thought it was just her talking." She took a slow breath. "I was wrong about that." Jacob nodded once. The open loop closed quietly, and more painfully than any dramatic reveal could have managed, by Nala's own voice. Mama Evelyn stood up from the armchair, her pearls catching the afternoon light. "I raised you better than to let a man run your life," she said to Nala, though her eyes moved briefly to Jacob when she said it. "A man who owns everything and tells you nothing is the same kind of man your father was." "That's not what's happening here, Mama," Nala said, her voice fragile but not breaking. "That's what happened to you." Mama Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed. Something passed across her face. Not quite shame, not quite anger, but the particular exhausted flicker of a woman who has spent so long living inside a story that she has almost forgotten it was never the only true one. Here is the deeper pattern worth naming, because so many families carry a version of it without ever finding the words for what is happening. Mama Evelyn was not a controlling woman purely by nature. She was, very likely, a woman operating from a wound that had never healed, formed years earlier when she lost a marriage, and with it, a sense of safety she had never fully rebuilt. People who survive that kind of loss tend to respond in one of two ways. Some grow more open, more willing to trust, having learned how fragile love really is. Others grow more vigilant, treating every future relationship as a threat that simply has not revealed itself yet. Mama Evelyn had become the second kind, and without fully realizing it, she had spent the better part of a decade teaching her daughter to be afraid of the very thing. A steady, faithful husband. That might have finally broken the pattern for good. Mama Evelyn gathered her purse from the side table. "I'll let you two figure this out," she said, with a tightness that did not quite cover what was underneath it. "But don't come looking for me when you find out I was right." The screen door clicked shut behind her, softer than anyone expected. Jacob sat back down across from his wife. Zion had finally settled, her small fist curled against Nala's collarbone, breathing slow and even in the way only babies can manage, regardless of the storm happening around them. "I'm not asking you to stop loving her," Jacob said. "I would never ask you that. But I need you to understand what I am looking at. She has been working around us, around this marriage, for a long time. And I cannot keep building something with my hands shaking, waiting to find out what she is doing behind them." Nala wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "I know," she said. "I know, Jacob. I just don't know how to stop being scared of her. I've been afraid of disappointing her my whole life." Jacob reached across the table and took her hand, the same hand he had held at the courthouse in Indianola 4 years earlier, when they signed their marriage license. The same hand that had trembled while she folded onesies in the nursery they had painted together that spring. "Then maybe," he said quietly, "that is the thing we actually need to fix." What Jacob named in that moment is something counselors often point to as the real beginning of breaking a generational pattern. Not the confrontation itself, but the willingness to separate a person's fear from the truth underneath it. The goal was never to make Nala stop loving her mother. The goal was to help her recognize fear that did not belong to her, fear that had been handed down, unexamined, the way an old habit gets passed from one generation to the next without anyone ever questioning whether it still fits. A pattern that is never named tends to repeat. A pattern that gets named, even painfully, finally has the chance to end. Nala did not answer, but she did not pull her hand away either. Later that night, after Zion was asleep and the house had gone dark except for the porch light, Nala sat alone on the cedar swing with her phone in her lap. She scrolled back through old voice recordings she had not listened to in years, her thumb moving slowly across the screen. It stopped on one file in particular, dated 8 months before her wedding day, saved from a phone call she had recorded almost by accident during a long drive back from her mother's house in the spring. She had never played it for anyone. She was not sure, until that moment, whether she ever intended to. The first time Jacob had heard Nala mention her father was tonight, when she said the word "daddy" in the middle of that confrontation, and something in her face had shifted in a way that was hard to name. Jacob had noticed it. He had filed it away without comment, the way he filed away most things that felt unfinished. He did not yet know that the most important piece of this story was sitting in an old shoebox, in a closet, in a letter written 19 years ago by a man he had never met. What Nala finally played for Jacob in that counseling room would prove her mother had been planning this since before the wedding vows were ever spoken. "Stay right there," Because what comes next changes the entire story. The counseling office sat above a flower shop on Howard Street in Greenwood. The kind of second-floor walk-up with a window unit that rattled every few minutes, and a couch that had absorbed a great many difficult conversations over the years. Dr. Patterson, a soft-spoken woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, had been seeing them for 3 weeks by then. Not as a couple trying to repair a marriage exactly, but as two people trying to understand what had actually broken it. It was during the 4th session that Nala reached into her purse with a hand that was not quite steady and pulled out her phone. "There's something I need you both to hear," she said. "I should have done this a long time ago." She pressed play. Mama Evelyn's voice filled the small room, cold and deliberate in a way that made the window unit's rattle seem very far away. "I will not let your child repeat my mistakes. The land needs to be in your name. The money needs to be under your control. If necessary, I'll help you handle the paperwork. Don't you ever trust a man who works the land and comes home quiet. That's exactly the kind that will blindside you." The recording ran another 20 seconds before Nala stopped it. "That was recorded 8 months before our wedding," Nala said, her voice barely holding together. "I was driving home from her house one evening in the spring, and she called. I hit record because something about the way she was talking felt different, more specific than usual. I told myself I was being paranoid. I saved the file and never listened to it again until last week." The room was still. Jacob sat on the office couch, hands folded between his knees, and did not speak right away. 8 months before the wedding, before he had even proposed, his mother-in-law had been building an exit plan for his marriage before he had ever asked Nala to enter it. "I was scared," Nala continued, tears slipping freely now. "I was scared you would think I had known all along, that I was part of it. But I wasn't, Jacob. I heard it and I buried it because I didn't want to believe she was capable of something that deliberate." Jacob looked at his wife steadily. "I know you weren't part of it," he said. "I knew that before you played the tape. But Nala, do you understand what this recording means? Your mother was not reacting to something I did. She was not protecting you from a problem that had already shown itself. She decided, before our marriage even began, that it was going to fail. And then she spent 4 years making sure the pieces were in place for exactly that outcome." What the recording revealed was something psychologists call a self-fulfilling prophecy within family systems, and it is one of the most quietly destructive forces a marriage can face. Mama Evelyn had decided, long before Jacob ever entered the picture, that any husband would eventually betray her daughter. She did not wait to find out whether that fear was true. Instead, she began preparing for the betrayal before the marriage had begun, quietly gathering information, building financial leverage, and slowly eroding Nala's confidence in her own husband. Fear, left unexamined long enough, does not simply predict the future. When it is acted upon with enough patience and intention, it can construct it. 2 mornings after that session, Jacob's phone rang at 6. It was Nala, breathless, barely coherent. "It's Mama. She collapsed at the house. They're taking her to Greenwood LaFleur." By the time Jacob got Nala and Zion to the hospital, Mama Evelyn was already in a curtained bay, hooked to monitors. "A mild heart attack," the attending physician said. Her blood pressure had been elevated for months. The prescription bottle Jacob had noticed in her purse that Saturday was one of 3 medications she had been managing inconsistently. Her own doctor would confirm later. She was stable for now, but would need to stay for observation. Nala stood frozen in the hallway outside the curtain, her body rigid, hands pressed flat against her thighs. This was not crying. This was the particular stillness that takes hold of a person when reality arrives faster than the nervous system can process it. A kind of suspended shock. like a room after a sound so loud it leaves only silence. Jacob stood beside her. He did not reach for her hand right away. He let the stillness be what it was for a moment. Then he spoke, quietly, standing close enough that no one passing in the corridor could hear. "You can go in," he said. "There's nothing stopping you from going in right now. But before you do, I need to ask you something. Not for my sake, but for hers, and for Zion's. Are you walking in there as your mother's daughter? Or are you walking in there as a woman who has finally decided what she is and is not willing to carry?" Nala turned to him. Her eyes were dry. That particular dry that comes after a person has moved past the point where tears are useful. "Do you still love me?" she asked, her voice quiet. Not desperate, just honest. The way a person asks a question they genuinely do not know the answer to. "You are still the woman I love," Jacob said. "Steady even now. Even here in a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and fluorescent light. But I cannot keep watching you build our family around your mother's fear. Not because of what it does to me, because of what it will do to Zion if we let it run another generation." There is a concept in family therapy called differentiation. The ability to remain emotionally close to someone you love while still standing on your own ground, making your own judgments, holding your own values separate from theirs, without differentiation. Love quietly becomes obligation. Every "I agree" becomes an act of survival rather than honesty. Every silence is a strategy rather than peace. Jacob was not asking Nala to stop loving her mother. He was asking her, perhaps for the first time in her life, to be a separate person from her. Nala wiped her face once with the heel of her hand. Then she walked through the curtain. Mama Evelyn lay propped against thin hospital pillows, an IV taped to the back of her hand, looking smaller than Nala had ever seen her. Smaller than the woman who had stood in that living room in Indianola and called the police with a voice tuned precisely for maximum effect. Nala pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nala said it, simply, looking her mother in the eyes with something that had not been there before. Not anger, not accusation, but the quiet, unmistakable resolve of a woman who had finally decided to tell the truth. "Mama, I love you, but I cannot let you destroy my marriage anymore." Mama Evelyn's lips trembled. The monitor beeped on beside her, indifferent. "You're abandoning me?" The voice that came out was smaller than anything Nala had heard from her mother since childhood. Stripped of its usual authority, down to something older and more frightened underneath. Nala reached over and took her mother's hand carefully, the IV tape cool beneath her fingers. "I am not abandoning you," she said, with a gentleness that cost her something. "I am just refusing to let you keep controlling me. Those are not the same thing. And I think somewhere in you, Mama, you already know that." Mama Evelyn closed her eyes. She did not answer. But for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, she did not argue either. It is worth pausing on what just happened in that hospital room, because it is easy to miss its significance in the middle of the emotion. When Nala said, "I am not abandoning you," she was doing something extraordinarily difficult. She was refusing to let her mother's fear define the terms of the conversation. Mama Evelyn heard the word boundary and reached instinctively for the word abandonment, because that was the oldest wound she carried, the one formed when her own husband left. People who have survived a profound loss often cannot distinguish between someone leaving them and someone simply declining to be controlled by them. A boundary sounds, to a wounded nervous system, exactly like a goodbye. Recognizing the difference and teaching someone you love to recognize it too is one of the most difficult and most necessary acts of love any family can attempt. What Nala found packed away in an old shoebox just days later would reveal that her mother's story had already played out once before, and the truth inside that letter was about to change everything they thought they understood about why their family had broken the way it did. They tried. That deserves to be said plainly, because it is true, and because any story that pretends love simply evaporates the moment trust is damaged is not telling the full truth. Jacob and Nala sat through 3 more counseling sessions in the small office above the flower shop on Howard Street. They talked through the recordings, the bank calls, the years of interference Nala had spent her whole adult life not quite letting herself see clearly. But somewhere in that 3rd session, Dr. Patterson said something neither of them could argue with. Nala, the marriage is not the thing that needs healing first. You are. And until that happens, anyone standing close to you is going to keep absorbing the impact of your mother's fear, even someone as patient as Jacob. Nala sat with that for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly, like a woman agreeing with something she had known for years, but had never quite let herself say out loud. They decided together, quietly and without raised voices, to separate, not because the love had left, because they both understood, with a maturity that had cost them something real to arrive at, that staying together before Nala had done her own healing would only give the cycle one more generation to run in. Jacob kept the house and the 11 acres outside Indianola. They arranged shared custody of Zion with the help of a mediator, formalized everything through the Chancery Court in Sunflower County, the proper venue for property and custody matters in Mississippi, with attorneys present for both sides. It took several weeks of careful paperwork, not the rushed, informal signing that heartbreak sometimes imagines. They were deliberate about it, because Zion deserved deliberate. About a week before the final court date, Jacob was moving some of Nala's remaining boxes from the hallway closet when he found a shoebox tucked behind a stack of old photo albums, the kind of box that gets carried from apartment to apartment without ever really being unpacked, because what is inside it is too heavy to look at directly and too important to throw away. He brought it to her without opening it. Nala lifted the lid, moved aside a small stack of old report cards and a dried corsage from high school, and found a folded letter near the bottom. The paper was soft with age, the ink worn to a pale brownish blue. She unfolded it slowly, her breath caught before she had finished the first line. "It's from my father," she said. "He wrote this the year he left. I was 12. I didn't even know this existed." Jacob sat across from her at the kitchen table as she read it aloud, her voice growing thinner with every line. Her father had written that he was leaving not because he had stopped loving his daughter, but because Evelyn had once tried to remove his name from the farmland they had shared together, using the same language she would use again 2 decades later on her own daughter's husband, protecting her family, and the warning that men who work the land cannot be trusted to stay. He had written that he did not leave to punish anyone. He left because he could not find a way to stay in a marriage where the ground kept shifting under his feet. Near the bottom of the page, in handwriting that had clearly slowed, the pen pressing harder, the letters more deliberate, was a single line meant for the daughter he was leaving behind. "Don't ever let your mother do to your husband what she did to me. If you truly love someone, hold on to the truth, even when it's the harder thing to hold." Nala set the letter down on the table and pressed both hands over her mouth. She did not cry. She had moved past the point where tears came easily, into something quieter and more absolute. The stillness of a person watching an entire architecture of belief rearrange itself all at once. This is the moment the story has been quietly building toward. Not the 911 call, not the bank call, not even the recording from before the wedding. this letter, because it revealed something none of the other evidence could. That Mama Evelyn was not simply a controlling woman who had gone too far. She was a woman repeating, almost word for word and act for act, the very pattern that had once destroyed her own marriage. She had spent 19 years convinced that what happened to her was something a man had done to her, when part of it, the part she never examined, was something she had done herself, and without meaning to, without ever choosing it consciously. She had spent those same 19 years teaching her daughter to continue the cycle in her own home. "I don't want to keep this going," Nala said, her voice very quiet. "I don't want Zion sitting at a kitchen table 20 years from now reading a letter I wrote her about why I let my mother's fear run my marriage. But I also cannot be with you right now, Jacob. Not the way I need to be. I have to fix what is broken in me first. I have to do that for myself. And for her." Jacob looked at his wife. His eyes were red, but his voice held. "Then fix it," he said. "Take whatever time that takes. This house is not going anywhere. Your daughter is not going anywhere. And the version of you that comes out the other side of this, she is going to be someone Zion is very lucky to have as her mother." Nala clutched the letter carefully and looked down at it for a long moment. Then she looked up. "Thank you," she said, "for not becoming the man my mother was afraid of." Jacob nodded once, slowly. "Thank you," he said, "for finally believing I never was." They signed the final paperwork at the Sunflower County Chancery Court on a Thursday morning, the ceiling fan turning slow circles overhead, the room holding the quiet weight of a decision made by two people who had not stopped loving each other, but who understood, clearly and without bitterness, that sometimes the most loving choice is the one that costs the most. Stay for the final part, because what Jacob did with that farmhouse and that pecan tree in the months that followed gave Zion something her grandmother never managed to give anyone: proof that the cycle could actually be broken. Spring came back to Indianola the way it always does in the Mississippi Delta, slow at first, then all at once. The pecan tree out front pushing out pale green leaves, the soybean fields turning that soft, new color that means another season of hard work is about to begin. Jacob stood on the cedar porch most evenings, the same swing creaking its same familiar creak beside him. Some nights, Marcus came by with a six-pack and too many opinions about the Braves' bullpen. Some nights, it was just Jacob. A glass of sweet tea, the sound of the fields settling in the dark. Zion came every other week, her laugh bigger now, her steps steadier, learning to cross the porch boards her father had laid before she was ever born. She had named the old box fan in the kitchen the noisy thing, and refused to nap without it running. Jacob let her win that one every time, without question. Nala had moved into a small rental near her job in Greenwood, close enough that the custody handoffs were easy, far enough that the breathing room was real. She was in individual therapy twice a month. She had stopped apologizing for needing it. She and Jacob talked most weeks, mostly about Zion and logistics, occasionally about nothing in particular. The easy, low-stakes kind of conversation that only becomes possible after the anger has fully drained out of a relationship and left something more honest behind it. Mama Evelyn recovered from the heart attack. She and Nala were speaking again. Slowly, carefully, with boundaries Nala had never dared set before. Visits arranged in advance. No access to paperwork or finances. No instructions about Nala's life unless they were asked for. It was not the mother-daughter relationship either of them had once imagined. But it was honest, and for the first time, it was something Nala had chosen rather than inherited. One evening in May, Jacob stood at the edge of the east field as the light went golden long across the soybean rows. and he let himself think through all of it. Not with bitterness, not with the rehearsed composure he had worn through the worst of it, but plainly, the way a man thinks when he is finally standing still enough to take stock. His mother-in-law had not known. When she walked into that house with her spare key and her open folder, that the land had been his from the very beginning. She had acted out of something older and more frightened than calculation. A wound formed so many years ago that it had long since stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like wisdom. She had genuinely believed she was saving her daughter. She had genuinely not understood that what she was doing was the very thing she feared most: breaking a family from the inside. When Nala read her father's letter, she did not just discover a secret. She discovered that her mother had been the author of her own worst fear and had been trying, without knowing it, to write the same ending for her daughter's story. That knowledge had not made Nala hate her mother. It had made her understand her. And understanding, in this family's case, turned out to be the only thing powerful enough to interrupt the loop. Here is what this story leaves behind, not as a lesson to recite, but as something to carry. The next time a daughter-in-law or son-in-law sits at your table and you feel the old unease rising, the sense that they are not quite what you hoped for, that your child deserves something different, try this before you say a single word about it. Take out a notepad and write down one specific, concrete thing that person has done right for your child this year. Not a general quality, one actual moment, one real thing. Read it back to yourself before Sunday dinner. That one habit, practiced consistently, is worth more than years of silent disapproval. And if you are the one who has been doubted, the Jacob in this story, do what he did. Keep the paperwork organized and current. Keep your composure visible. Let your actions accumulate quietly over time until the record speaks so clearly that no single accusation can survive it. Not because you owe anyone a performance of your worth, but because the children watching you, including the ones too young to understand what they are watching, are learning what trust looks like from you. And if there is a Zion in your family, watching from a high chair or a car seat or a porch step, taking in how the adults around her handle their oldest wounds, she is not learning what you say about love. She is learning what you do with it when it gets hard. This story reminds us that protecting someone and trusting someone are not the same thing, and a family can only truly build on one of them. Nala chose to heal. Jacob chose not to keep feeding a cycle that was never his to begin with. And Zion will grow up with two parents who were brave enough to stop the pattern instead of passing it to her, the way it had been passed, without question, for a generation before. It was not a fairy tale ending. There was no dramatic reunion, but it was honest, and it was hard-won, and it was real. Sometimes, that is the most a family broken open by old pain can ask for. Not a perfect resolution, but a true one. Thank you for spending this time with me. Drop a comment below and tell me which part of this story stayed with you, and I will see you in the next one. These powerful stories were written by real people with deep emotions and life experience, with AI serving only as a supportive tool to help polish the language and deliver valuable lessons of justice, kindness, and resilience to millions of viewers. Production team: Story and Screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character Development and Visual Conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.